Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress with coverage of Round 3 of the 2018 Sinquefield Cup. Round 3 saw 4 quick draws in Aronjan Carlsen, Karjakin Anand and Vasyl Graf So. A long hard-fought draw between Mamedyarov and Caruana, and that leaves the USA versus Russia clash between Nakamura and Grischuk, and that's the game we're going to look at. This is Nakamura coming to the board, Grischuk already sitting at the board. You see him on the back, shaking hands before the game. Let's have a look at what happened. Nakamura was white, Grischuk was black, played on the 20th of August 2018. E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, and we get into the Italian game. Bishop C5, D3, Knight F6, the Giuoco piano. Both players castled. C3 and D5, and it was Grandmaster Sarah in the broadcast who explained this move. When this line started to be played in the 16th century, this D5 move was thought as a bad move because black will get trouble with his e-pawn. But in recent years, top grandmasters are playing D5 and black seems to be fine. Theory moves on over the decades and centuries. Nakamura took on D5, knight takes, and then rook E1. Now it looks like black has some trouble with his E5 pawn. F6 to defend it is not good, because that opens this diagonal, which is trouble. Rook E8 is not a great move either, because as Saron explained, either knight Bd2 followed by knight E4 and bishop G5, or D4 is also a good move, and taking now is a big blunder because of rook takes E8 check and the queen is overworked. The queen has to take and then the knight falls off. Little theory lesson from Grandmaster Saruhan. After rook E1, Grischuk chose bishop G4, pinning the knights. Knight Bd2, knight B6, hitting the bishop on C4, bishop went to B5, and bishop D6, protecting the E5 pawn. White played H3, bishop back, and knight E4. Here F5 is the most popular move according to the database, but Grischuk, after quite a long think, played rook E8 instead. Bishop G5 hitting the queen, F6, bishop E3, A6, and white took on C6, ruining black's pawn structure on the queen side. Knight G3 hitting the bishop, bishop dropped back to F7, C4, bishop B4 hitting the rook, rook stepped up, bishop back to F8, B3, and here a very important and very instructive move from Grischuk. He played C5. And it was Grandmaster Ramirez who explained that this is to stop white playing D4. Yes, the move C5 blunts the bishop on F8, but stopping D4 means that white will have a permanent weakness on D3. This pawn will be a big headache for white, as we'll see in the remainder of the game. So the move C5 shows Grischuk's deep understanding of chess. Queen E1 was played by Nakamura, and let's take stock here. 49 minutes left for Nakamura on the clock and only 30 minutes for Grischuk after 20 moves. Only one minor piece is swapped. Black has a fractured pawn structure on the queen side, while white has a weak pawn on D3, with the light squared bishop missing, so he won't be able to help that pawn, protect that pawn with a bishop. Black is slightly better. A5 from Grischuk, rook D1 and A4. Knight D2, this knight is on its way to C3, which is a better square. Queen D7, there goes the knight to B1, and Grischuk takes. A takes. Black has now created a second weakness in white's position. One weakness is usually not a big deal for the defender, but it's hard to keep hanging on to two weaknesses. White is firmly on the defensive. These two pawns. So Grischuk played up his A-pawn with the goal to create another weakness. following the theory of trying to create two weaknesses in your opponent's camp. Black is better. Bishop g6, hitting that pawn. f3 and rook a d8, really ganging up on the pawn on d3 now. 23 minutes left for Nakamura, 15 minutes for Grischuk, and the grandmasters in the studio were slightly surprised that Grischuk did not play his other rook to d8, because the rook on a8 was doing fine on the open file. Queen f2, queen c6, and now this pawn is hanging, now that the queen has moved off the d file. Rook ed2 to protect it. Knight d7, Grischuk is rerouting his knight to f6 after playing the f-pawn up. Knight c3 and h6 to make sure no bishop will appear on g5 after Grischuk pushes the f-pawn. Again, quite instructive. King h1 and king h8, knight b5, bishop h7, rook a2, d3 is now not hanging, so white can activate his rook. There comes f5, bishop c1, lots of maneuvering in this game. Knight f6 as planned, knight c3, back to where it came from, and queen b7, attacking the b3 pawn and stopping rook a7 ideas. Rook b2 from Nakamura, who only had 7 minutes left for the last 6 moves. Grischuk had 6 minutes. g5, increasing the tension, weakening his king somewhat, but giving this bishop a new lease of life. Rook d7 would have been another idea to double up on the d file to probe that d3 weakness again. But g5 was played, and rook b1 from Nakamura. Queen c6, bishop b2, king g8, knight f1, both players trying to get to the 40th move, to the time control. And knight h5, nice move, on its way to f4 to put even more pressure on d3. Knight d5, queen d6, preparing to play c6 to give that knight a kick, so black can then get his knight to f4. Nakamura played knight g3, challenging the knight on h5. And Grischuk on the 39th move plays a great one. c6, not worrying about his knight on h5. If that knight is taken, then c takes d5. Look at these pawns. 5 pawns abreast. But black really has improved his pawn structure a lot here, and this is a very good position for black. So after c6, Nakamura did not take on h5, he retreated his knight to c3, which enabled Grischuk on the 40th move to get into f4, putting a lot of pressure now again on d3. White's maneuvers in the last handful of moves with both knights have not worked out at all, and black really has a very good position here, a winning position even. Nakamura's in trouble. He played queen f1, and now knight takes d3 looks very logical. It was played also by Grischuk, but only after 28 minutes. And he did not give an interview after the game. It would have been interesting to hear what he had been thinking about here on move 41. Knight takes d3 seems so logical. Black is up a pawn, has a beautiful knight on d3. Everything is going great for him. But we're not finished yet. Knight ce2 and queen e6. Getting the queen out of the pin. Black has all the time in the world to improve his pieces. His long-term plan may be to push his pawn to e4. Bishop c3 and rook d6. Grischuk wants to double rooks. Rook d2, rook ed8 as planned, and rook bd1. Bishop g6, taking any knight h5 jumps out of the position, taking the square away. Knight c1, white cannot live with a knight on d3 and decides to try and swap it. Knight takes, rook takes d6 in between, bishop takes, and rook takes the knight back. And here, the grandmasters in the live broadcast were screaming for e4, and the e-pawn was also screaming to be played up. Looks like a very good move. The Grischuk decided on rook b8, hitting that weakness on b3. If you defend it, then f4 looks like a great move, hitting the knight and hitting the rook, but you still have knight e4, solving both problems in one move. But after rook b1, e4 is very strong. Nakamura also quite instructively decides not to defend passively. He wants to activate his pieces and plays rook a1, giving up the b3 pawn. Now black is 2 pawns up. Rook a8 check. Finally white has an active piece. Rook b8, rook a6, and bishop f8 to protect the c6 pawn. Queen e2, bishop g7, and rook a7. Now the move e4 is stopped for the moment. If you now play e4, then rook takes g7 check, and white is taking over, protected by the bishop. Grischuk was not going to fall for that. He played rook e8. And h4, Nakamura gives a third pawn. He's trying to get a blockade, and he felt he had to give a third pawn to achieve that. G takes. Yes, 3 pawns up, but of course 4 of those pawns are doubled. Knight f1 and f4 to keep the knight out of e3. Knight d2 on its way to the blockading square on e4. Rook e7, that rook was swapped, and knight e4 as planned, followed by bishop f7. Targeting the c4 pawn, which does restrict the white queen. King h2, and now Grischuk gives up a pawn to soften up white's king's position and the second rank. G takes h3, queen e6, now doubling attacking the c4 pawn, and Nakamura was playing quite quickly, trying to keep Grischuk under time pressure. Here he could have taken on c5, but then queen takes, and bishop takes, and very good position still for black. Instead, Nakamura decided on queen g2. And if you now take on c4, there is bishop takes e5, and you cannot take back because of the pin, and white is still alive. So after queen g2, Grischuk played king h7 to unpin his bishop on g7. Knight c2, Nakamura ahead on the clock. Grischuk is under 4 minutes here, and he's making it as difficult as possible for black. Now the knight threatens to jump away with a discovered check. So king back to h8 and queen b2. King back to h7, and yes, Nakamura was really playing quickly here, keeping the pressure on his opponent, and he decided to go back and bring a move repetition in the position. But he probably should have paused here and look at knight takes c5 instead. In the live broadcast, the grandmasters thought that this was white's best option. But Nakamura goes back and asks black to find another move than king h8 with a repetition. And Grischuk played queen g6. Now this knight is pinned. Queen e2 on pinning the knight. Bishop e6. Queen f1 and bishop f5. Threatening to win a piece by taking, and if you take back, there's queen g3 check, attacking the bishop on c3, winning that bishop. That's a threat. So queen e2 from Nakamura to deal with the threat, and black can go into an endgame now with bishop takes e4, queen takes, f takes, but this is hard to win. Black is 2 pawns up, but this pawn doesn't really count as it is a doubled pawn. He can't do anything with that, with those c-pawns. So black is really only one pawn up, and this may be very hard to win. So Grischuk did not go for the liquidation. He played queen h5. Queen f1 would be the best move here, but knight f2 was played. And Grischuk found a very strong move, queen h4 now. And he's going to win either the h3 or the f3 pawn now by force. Nakamura saw nothing better than go back with the knight. Losing the h-pawn is now 3 pawns down, and that is too much. King g1 and queen back to h5 with the idea of queen g6 and then liquidate into the bishop endgame. Now that the h3 pawn is gone, it is an easy win. One pawn makes a huge difference. Bishop e1 played by Nakamura, and Grischuk indeed goes into the bishop endgame. Queen takes e4 check, and queen g6 check. King steps aside, the queens are swapped, and the endgame is an easy win for black. But Grischuk still had to show his technique. Let's see how he did it. King g6, king h3, king h5, and bishop h4. Nakamura says, show me your technique. You only have a few minutes on the clock. And Grischuk found the nice move f3. Bishop f2, bishop f6, improving that bishop. Bishop e1 marking time. Bishop g5, still marking time. Bishop back. Bishop e1 again. Bishop d8. Both players are dancing around each other like two boxers. Bishop g3 and king g5. Very nice move. Are you blundering a piece? Well, you're giving away a piece, but it's not a blunder. If Nakamura decides to go for bishop h4 check with his skewer, then king f4, bishop takes, king e3, bishop back, king e2, king g4, f2, and you have to give your bishop for the pawn. Bishop takes, king takes, and this is an easily winning king and pawn endgame. White has to pick up the h-pawn, and in the meantime, black will take the e and c pawns and wins easily. King g5, what a beautiful move. On move 81, after 6 hours of play, Grischuk found this great resource. So winning the piece is not good, and Nakamura has another option. He can take on e5 and create his own passed pawn. But Grischuk had seen it all. Bishop f6. Swapping the bishops is no good for white. Bishop d6, f2. The king has to guard the promotion square. Bishop d4, protecting the pawn. And if you play e5, you start running with your own passed pawn, then you're going to lose that passed pawn after king f5. Nakamura chose king f1, king g4, king e2, and there comes the h-pawn. King f1, h4, bishop back, h3, as Grandmaster Sarawan calls it. Black has two bridesmaids, one of them will queen, and white's e-pawn is firmly under control. The king is close enough. This pawn is not dangerous. King e2, and now Grischuk found a beautiful last move to finish off the game. Bishop e3. Nakamura resigned. If you take that bishop, then the bridesmaid promotes to a queen, and black wins. And if you don't take the bishop but play king f1, then black can force the bishop swap with bishop f4. Bishop takes, king takes. You can take on f2, but black takes on e4, and this king and pawn endgame is trivial, a very easy win for black. Great technique from Alexander Grischuk in the endgame. He probably could have won more quickly with e4 instead of rook b8 to win that second pawn on b3, but after that He showed great technique to bring the point home. The first win for Black in this 2018 Sinquefield Cup. The moment of resignation, Nakamura got up from the board straight away, but very sportingly sat down again to look at some of the variations with his opponent. So after 4 draws and Grischuk's win over Nakamura shows the table after 3 rounds. 4 players on +1, Mamedyarov, Aronian, Carlsen and Grischuk, they all won 1 game. 3 players have made 3 draws, Vachier-Lagrave, Anand and Caruana. Nakamura and So both lost 1 game and Kh1 lost 2, and he made his first draw. He is now on the scoreboard. Round 4 will be played on Tuesday the 21st of August and we'll see Mamedyarov Aronian, the All-USA clash Caruana Nakamura, Grischuk Vachier-Lagrave, So Kh1 and the 15th world champion Anand versus the 16th world champion Carlsen. I will be here after the round to tell you what happened. Hope you liked the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel. Please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply. If you liked the video, it would be great if you could share it on social media. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.